All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's interview. This is one that I have been really looking forward to. Damon is someone that we've worked with myself in our condo at home, my wife and I, and then as well as in our office. And it's someone that we've referred a lot of you guys to. If we haven't talked to you about him already, that's why we're here today. So welcome, Damon.
Thanks. It's great to be here, Ty.
Yeah, great to have you. So if you don't know Damon, he's owner of an intentional environment. He's been doing intentional environment since '97, so a good long run there. And it was actually, he has a title that I've never heard before till we started working with him, but that is one of building biologist. And I think it's such a cool perspective that he and his wife bring to their work is not only like the layout of your space, but how different things in your space can be impacting your health or your child's health. And he works with so many things that you can't even see. And that's what we're going to talk about today is, especially in today's modern day and age, things like cell phones and iPads and computers and Wi-Fi and all these EMFs and electrical pollution, what that really means to our health. We're going to talk about what you can be looking out for to see if maybe it is impacting your health more than you realize, and then some simple things to do about it. So just to give you kind of an idea, if you're wondering, like, is this for me? Some of the things that we see this affects are quality of sleep, are like how much you can feel stressed or relaxed, affects immune system, it affects digestion, and it affects some of the kids that we see, especially nowadays, with that like revved up gas pedal just on all the time. This could be one of the hidden things behind it. So welcome, Damon. Glad you are able to join us today. Let's get started then, just to give people an overview, especially if this is something new for them. What is electropollution? What are EMFs? What are we talking about when we say those things?
Sure. So the maybe I'll turn that down. Okay. Electropollution really has to do with the various types of electromagnetic radiation that are impacting humans in a negative way. I mean, the electroclimate is the natural background levels of electromagnetic radiation, which is large aspect of what the universe is made of. You know, we have the sun and the moon and the stars and all these cosmic radiations coming into the Earth, and then we have the molten core within the Earth radiating, making a magnetic field that protects us from that stronger radiation from the sun. So there's a dynamic natural background electromagnetic field and it turns out that all biological life is really regulated by electric and magnetic fields and charges. So if you think about an atom, it's made of protons, which are, positively charged, and electrons that are negatively charged. So we're influenced by fields outside of ourselves, as well as the communication signals with our nervous system and other cellular communication within the body. So when we've had a significant change in the background levels, especially of this microwave radio frequency radiation in the last 100 years, particularly since radio came on the scene, and then it's really exponentially rise since the 80s when we started to have the cell phone infrastructure in place. Just to give a kind of a broad view of that, you have like in 1985 there was 90 cell phone towers in the United States, and now there's close to 350 or 250,000 of them, and so we have that as a significant dynamic with the changing of the electroclimate, not only the background broadcasts of radiation, but all the devices that people are using. And so all these devices are basically transmitting signals that are different, as well as the FM and AM radio. They have pulsed waves, and the pulsed electromagnetic radiation we find is having even more of a biological impact and a bigger concern. Currently, the regulations around those exposures are based on the heating of tissue in the body, like the microwave oven effect, we call it. And that is really based on obsolete science, and has been for a long time. There's now over 20,000 peer-reviewed scientific papers showing effects that are what we call non-thermal effects that happen before the tissue starts to heat up. So the regulatory bodies are not really up to speed on what the scientists are saying are concerns. And so that's one aspect. And then the nature of the electromagnetic radiation from power distribution, like what gives us our lights and our power in our homes. There's fields within that are at different strengths can be significant issues, especially where you're sleeping or where you're spending a lot of time. So, overhead power lines, but also you can have wiring errors that cause magnetic fields in a home, electric fields radiating from wires that are plugged in, but also those that are feeding the outlets and lights. The electric fields can really impact melatonin production and depth and quality of sleep. So, from the building biology perspective, we're trying to reduce these exposures of the various types from each of these categories into a healthy range to support health and well-being.
Got it. Yeah, I think that's a huge overview. I picture for myself I went to college, I started college in 2000, and I remember going to school. My mom got me a cell phone because she wanted me to be safe. And maybe like half the kids had cell phones, and all the ones that we had were like the super simple, you type in the number and all it did was call. Maybe there's a couple simple games on it, but that was like its only function. And now I look at how the smartphones, we have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and just the magnitude of power is way, way more, and everyone has them at this super young age. So I think that's so important that you brought up that you don't, like, we know if we stick our hand in a microwave, it's not going to be good for our hand, right? Because you can like feel that change, but that these cell phones or Wi-Fi, other things, we don't actually feel the change unless we're really sensitive to it. But it's not obvious what's going on.
Yeah. For most people, it is a dynamic that not you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, but some people do feel it. And there's now more surveys that have been happening around the world that have been seeing people's general awareness of sensitivity levels. And so it's kind of estimated about 35% on average of the population is moderately sensitive, but maybe 3 to 5 to some estimate 10% more be hyper-electrically sensitive. And that's more of an issue as well with the children that a lot of parents aren't aware of. They're one of the primary symptoms or effects could be dynamics that are affecting what you were talking about being revved up or overly stimulated. You can get, it's an interesting dynamic when you have like something like an iPad. It can actually, there can be a psychological addiction issue, which is a whole nother dynamic with our devices, but also the exposure issue that there can be an initial hit of dopamine and adrenaline that's an exciting thing, but then you're going to get other effects over a little longer period. They're going to cause more cortisol and these hormones to be stimulated in the body that are going to be more neurotoxins and cause inflammation in the body. So when you're getting inflammation going on, there can be effects with behavioral and focus issues and all those other developmental concerns around that as well.
Yeah, and that, just to give you guys who are watching an example, one of the families that Damon and I have worked with mutually, I remember Mom telling me the story where one of her boys was about 7, 8 years old, and he'd wake up tired and groggy and like super grumpy every morning. And Damon was just talking about melatonin and sleep. And so Damon went over and assessed their house and gave them a way to shield things temporarily to see what would happen. And they shielded all these things that we're talking about. And just like that, the next morning, the boy woke up like in a way better mood than parents had seen him in such a long time. And it was because in his environment, things were just bombarding his system so much, he couldn't get into a deep state of sleep, his nervous system just stayed on edge. So when he woke up in the morning, he was grumpy and groggy and not in a good mood. So it just shows how powerful this was, because I remember Mom saying they used it for a while and then took this shielding away, and all of a sudden he went back to grumpy and groggy again, and showing how powerful these things were on his environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of times people don't know until they do, like you're saying, produce it. And what's been interesting is working with families when, and a lot of times we're going in for certain family members that are having more chronic health issues. And so say the family's commits to taking the mitigation options seriously and follows through. We're so often getting reports back that even the man of the house, which is more common than not, is admitting that he feels better and can think better and have more energy. Usually that's coming from the wife, that reports that. But it's always interesting because I've seen more and more that everybody's impacted. They just don't know it. And our kind of our state of or sense of well-being and health is so relative. I mean, and often people don't really remember what they even felt like a week ago or
And that's
yesterday sometimes.
right. And
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest things with these types of stresses. If it is your cell phone sitting next to your bed at night, or your Wi-Fi router just on 24 hours a day, you don't get a break from it. So you never get the contrast to see, what do I feel like without it? I know for myself, since I've been tuning in more to these things, if I have my cell phone and for some reason I put it on like a hotspot, so it's my computer can connect to internet on my phone, in like 20 seconds or so, I'll feel like this buzzing in my head starts to hurt, because I realize, I've like basically up the amplitude on my phone so much that hotspot is now stressing my body out. Because I think for myself, I'm probably more in that mid-range, where if it's a low level, I don't notice it as much. But as soon as it hits a certain threshold, I realize, now I'm feeling it. Yet it was there all along.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, like you're saying, a lot of times it's people doing experiments like that where they're realizing the impact. But so I think that's a good place to start. That's a place that people can begin with is reducing the wireless exposures. It's often one of the biggest priorities. I mean, sometimes there's issues going on that are, quite intense, and you wouldn't know it unless you were measuring in terms of like currents on the water pipes and the grounding system, and you're trying to sleep over that. That's one thing, some deeper investigation would reveal. But one dynamic is just reducing those exposures to the Wi-Fi and the cell phone. You can forward cell phones to landline, and you can even forward text messages to wired computers and so forth. So there's lots of strategies that we're often trying to help people be aware of and try. But yeah, reducing exposures at night is really key. But anytime, like you're saying, just trying to change those simple habits to reduce exposures can make a really nice difference.
Yeah, and because I know, we've talked about the sleep piece, we've talked about mood. I think I've heard you mention too, even things like fertility or cancer, because of the immune system can be affected by these as well. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of interesting that Dr. Sam Milham he's an epidemiologist, so looking at how death and disease rates affect whole populations. Okay. And he looked at how in the late 1800s to the early 1900s, when the electrification of society happened in urban areas, that the cancer rates and the heart rate disease, the disease of cardiovascular disease, heart conditions, diabetes, and suicide rates all went up. And what was interesting, you could see the same trend in the death records as it went into rural areas. So we started to see this difference in electromagnetic field exposure just even at that time. But then it's really accelerated, and you all know the cancer rates have have steadily increased. But these other dynamics with autism and Alzheimer's and the ADD and ADHD, I think are big issues. The infertility rates have, significantly changed. And one of the primary things around that we're seeing with the studies is that the sperm studies are showing exposures to the sperm cells are causing deformity, and it's really causing them to move more slowly and die more quickly. So the concern is that once you get any kind of mutations with the sperm cells, that you're also getting that's going to be something that lasts throughout the male's lifetime. They'll continue to make mutated cells, and that's an interesting dynamic with the autism thing. We're seeing the de novo mutations in the kids that are having on the spectrum that are not genetic dynamics that are found in the parents. So you have the testes are kind of outside the body. Mm-hmm. So the eggs are a little more protected in the girls, but the testes have the sperm cells quite exposed. So cell phones in pockets and that kind of thing is a big thing to consider. But then also once you're in utero and women are in pregnancy, protecting the fetus is really so critical. There's things like these belly bands that can protect, that women can wear, bellyarmor.com. Belly Armor's a great product that can protect the fetus, because we're finding that the cells within the fetus are so vulnerable to both what's going on with the woman as well as environmental exposures. And so, taking care of the kids is I know a big part of what you do, and so cool with what we hear reported back with how you're able to, help kids and families get more back on track. But moderating these exposures can be an important piece to supporting that overall journey. And I think it's an important thing. We see the 600% increase in the last 20 years of autism, right? And ADHD is at 53% increase just in the last 10 years. And all these 2/3 of the kids are now being treated with Ritalin and Adderall. Those are big changes in our whole, society of these generations coming in. And we've seen significant changes when you're reducing the exposures at home with the kids being able to focus and being able to track and being able to be more engaged with their family members. So I think that's all really important stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And that, I remember a talk from yours that I was at recently where you said even taking your cell phone, putting it an arm's distance away would drop by 100 times like the amount of impact it's having on your brain.
Yeah.
And that's so for me, I'm trying to, protect myself as much as I can, but at the same time be realistic. So like my brain, my heart, because I see a lot of pockets will be like the little zipper right here and you put it right over your heart, or in my pelvis area, since I'm still in childbearing years, from that standpoint too. So my brain, my heart, and my groin area, like always trying to whatever I do, keep it as far as away from those as possible. And with what you're saying, it just makes such perfect sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. What other things, so as far as simple strategies people can do at home, are there other things, I know for myself, we use airplane mode quite a bit. Whenever available, in our office here, we've set it up without Wi-Fi. So I know you can't see it here, but my computer actually has a wire through the Ethernet, through a USB that you helped us set up here in the office. So now I can actually plug my computer in. We've gone, instead of going wireless, we've gone wired, which is kind of counterintuitive in today's day and age. Um, are there other strategies that you recommend along those
Yeah,
lines?
minimizing the use,
Mm-hmm.
really uh, find it's best to not have kids use the cell phones at all.
Okay.
So having a landline is key. Even if that landline is coming over the internet, that's fine, because the signal, once it getting into your home or office, is not as important, because it can come in through the phone line, come in through broadband cable, or um, you know it can be on fiber optics, whatever. But once it gets in to your router, you just, one thing you can do is minimize the use of the Wi-Fi, have hardwired like you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But you can use internet-based phone systems, but you can have wired phones. So
Okay.
having wired phones in the house, convenient enough to use, is a great strategy. And being able to forward cell phones to ring and landline. Texting's a lot better, because you don't have to hold the phone up. So that's one fortunate trend, that people and teenagers and those are doing more texting than the talking and holding it up to your head. So those are good strategies. Minimizing the use in your car, because the car is like a steel cage that just bounces the radio frequency around within it. And so there's another dynamic with the phones, that they will boost up their signal when their signals from the background connection to the cell towers are not as strong or clear. They can boost up to higher strengths. So not only do they boost up to their highest strength when you initiate a call, but they will also do that when they're sometimes in a car, because there's less connection, and then you're switching from tower to tower as you drive,
Okay.
and so they'll have to boost up their power more. So those are some good strategies. Being aware of where the cell phone antennas are around you. Antennasearch.com is a great website that you can plug in your address, and you can see where are the towers that have multiple antennas, and where are the single antennas that may be on an apartment building, or different places around you.
Because that's what
So
I've heard, right? Like apartments or even schools or things like that, they'll put the antenna on the top of it.
yeah.
And wow, okay.
Yeah, and there's it's a challenge with schools. It's funny, because sometimes you're so close to them that it's going over you, but a
Okay.
lot of times it's a dynamic. And so you can see, like, if you're within a half a mile, sometimes 3/4 mile, or less than that, then it may be a more serious issue. And that's when, when we do our evals, we're just seeing what you have going on internally, and help you strategize to get set up so you don't have to have those internal exposures, but then see what the background levels are, and if they're within a healthy range or not. And then if not, then you can do some shielding, like we did with you there a little bit.
Right. And I remember even the nice thing with your eval is it gets us perspective. And at our condo that my wife and I live in, fortunately, the tower was in one spot, and then part of the condo building was here, and then we were on the other side of it. So our neighbors basically were blocking the cell phone tower. So for us, had the tower been on the other side of the condo building, it would have been zapping us directly. But fortunately, the side it was on was mitigating quite a bit just based on the location.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of dynamics with it. The radio frequencies, they bounce around and they reflect, and now, we're going to have this other dynamic of 5G coming on the scene, and that's fifth generation of the cell phone networks. And so they'll put in small cell antennas, so you can, watch for the light poles. I know throughout St. Paul, along West 7th Street and so forth, you can already see that they're putting them in. The Twin Cities are a test area in the country where the different cell phone companies are implementing some of the 5G technology, so it's getting put in, and they're going to basically try to put in transmitters every 200 yards or so throughout the urban areas. So that could change things a lot. The 5G is about the Internet of Things. So it's about how they want to connect all these things to track data, both like appliances and things, but also the self-driving cars. And, there'll be a lot of capacity for everything just to communicate to each other on through those wireless communications. But they'll be introducing higher frequency gigahertz fields. Those are billion times per second, and the waves are called millimeter waves. And we're not even really sure how we're being affected, but going to be affected by that, because there's been no pre-market testing, just like there wasn't for the initial cell phone infrastructure. Okay. So, but those signals will get interrupted by things, trees and building materials and brick buildings and so forth more. So it's, in some ways it's going to be a blessing because you can shield it, but if you're close to stuff and it's coming in, it's, it's going to be an interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
Now,
and
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I know before we wrap up today, I want to talk about what an eval looks like, more specific, for you to come and check things out. But before we do that, I wanted to touch on, from a tip standpoint, I know you talk about sleep being something where you want to mitigate even more than just like during your day. Could you speak just briefly to why sleep's the most important? And then, like, I know for our place, maybe we'll unplug our Wi-Fi at night if we're using it during the day. Or like we're really emphasizing these rules even more during sleep. So could you speak to why that is?
Yeah, well, when you're sleeping, you want to reach, as you mentioned in the beginning, the deepest stages of sleep in a consistent way. If you don't reach those deeper stages of sleep, then your body doesn't kick into its natural detoxification mode, and it doesn't do the repair, and it doesn't, fight inflammation in the brain and so forth. So your melatonin production is such a key neurotransmitter. That is something that governs your depth and quality of sleep and your circadian rhythms of when you're awake and asleep. So we know these different types of fields can impact that. So and so ideally you want to reduce the electric fields, which you can always improve electric field exposure in the sleeping area. So that's often one thing that we're testing is we can test how much of the electric field's conducted through the body where people are sleeping. And usually we're determining which circuits are contributing to that, which that have electric fields. And that helps us be informed on what's the most effective and cost-effective way to reduce the exposure. Some simple things you can do is like make sure there's not a bunch of extension cords and power strips and all these things plugged in around your bed, because that will increase it. But there's also, probably 2/3 of it's still going to be coming from the wiring in the walls, unless you're in a place like you were in the condo building that has metal conduit over the wires, and like a brick building has that. But most, single family dwelling homes are going to have the plastic jacketed wiring that lets the electric field radiate 6 to 8 feet from all the wires. So, you're looking at that. You're looking at, is there high frequencies in the electric field? So the more noise that's in it, the more biologically active it can be. That's more the dirty electricity. The magnetic fields are more often with wiring errors or stray currents and things. So those you just want to scan and see if they're happening, and they can be fixed by an electrician if it is. And then the fields will cancel as they're supposed to. There's other aspects of what we call geopathic stress, and that's more anomalies in the Earth's magnetic field, and that's a whole other subject, but it can be a factor that's contributing to sleep and other chronic health issues. So we kind of scan for all those issues, and just help people and guide them to creating a healthier space.
Nice, yeah. And that, I think, what I really liked when we've worked with you is there's when we're talking about these things, because they're not commonplace, sometimes people wonder, like, well, how impactful is it really? And so when you've been into our spaces, I like that you actually have the meters and you hold something up and you can see the number changing. I remember the first time you were at our home, and I had a little bit older cell phone at that time, and you brought it over and the number was reading like 800, and we wanted it below 100, I believe, and like under 10 for sleeping. But the point was, it was like 8 times what we wanted it by my phone. And we brought it next to my wife's phone, who had an iPhone, and it went from 800 up to like 12,000. Like, whoa. And then all of a sudden a call came in, her phone started ringing, and went from 12,000 up to 18,000. And it made another huge jump. And what I liked about working with you is, because you have the technology and the meters, it's not just like guessing where it is or how one room compares to another, but it's so tangible and you can see the change with something like that. So it really made me like, oh, okay, if I can see the meter going so high, I'm going to put my phone on airplane mode or have it turned off or in a completely another room a ways away from me when I'm sleeping at night, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I commend you for becoming aware of this issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so when you go through, you assess a home, you kind of get an idea of even room to room where things are at. And then what do next steps look like for people?
Well, usually we're doing the evaluation, and then like that last half hour or so, we're sitting down and going through what we've discovered and what we recommend. Sometimes there's just simple changes you can make right then. Other times you might want to incorporate, or we have an IT person that helps people get set up so they don't have to have all the wireless exposures and have still connectivity to the technologies they need. And electrician that works with us if related to wiring. Like sometimes a mitigation strategy is to have a remote switch installed so certain circuits get de-energized at night. Other times that's more complicated. Maybe it's, there's a whole bunch of circuits that would need to be addressed. So then you can use like grounding, shielding paints in the room, which would affect the electric field as well as the radio frequency if if there's outside sources that are high. Yeah, there's a lot of different strategies, but usually that conversation, we record it so that when we do a report, we send a follow-up email with the link to that audio file, because we're talking about things that most people aren't too familiar with. So it's often helpful to hear it a couple of times and take good notes. And so we try to guide people on strategies they can use to that are alternatives to making our technical world a little more navigable, So
yeah, I love that. And I think too, what I appreciated with working with you is that you give a good range of, here's a room that's extreme, like we have to do something. Here's something that's so. Here's like one, like, it'd take so much effort to mitigate it, such a small amount, it's probably not even worth it. So it makes it very just applicable as to the amount of effort you put in for how much results you're going to get. Which is really nice.
Yeah. Try to help people to see what priorities would be in the steps and try to make it as least overwhelming as possible.
Absolutely.
I think, it's an important thing affecting our society. But I think it's also important not to be in fear. You don't have to be in fear about it. You can be proactive and you can take measures to protect your space, your home environment. And if you can control it, your office environment or where you spend the most time can be a sanctuary that gives you a break from these exposures. And because we're all going to be exposed out in the world, but if you can moderate it, it makes a big difference in people's nervous systems, and their bodies can just re-regulate and be more vital. So
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great summary as we're wrapping up here is, if you have been out there looking and you feel like there's this missing piece, but you can't quite put your finger on it, it very well could be what we've been talking about today. So I definitely encourage you to reach out to Damon. We'll put your website and your phone number in the comments section below. Does that sound good?
Sure, that
For
sounds
people to
great.
get a hold of you? Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
wonderful.
All right.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Damon. Appreciate your time today. Glad we could connect. And if you guys out there watching, if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out, let them know, put them in the comments section below. We'll be keeping an eye on that and encourage you to reach out and see where your home is at.
All right.
All
Thanks, Ty.
right, you bet. See you
All right.
guys.